There is a battle brewing over the fur seal harvest at St. Paul, located on the Pribilof Islands off the coast of Alaska. Fur seals have been harvested by the Aleuts of St. Paul for more than a century, under both Russian and U.S. rule. But now the federal government wants the killing stopped. The topic is controversial. At stake, an international treaty, the future of the Pribilof people, and everyone seems to have an opinion.
The main problem with killing the seals is it is against the will of the American people.
Similar to any other resource, is something that can be utilized.
And if you've ever seen any other kind of slaughterhouse operation, this is far more humane than those.
Federal government is just going to dump us out in the cold with no means for survival.
Well, basically, they want to live in a white man's world. They should live in a white man's world and move off the islands and leave those islands to the seals.
St. Paul seeking a better tomorrow, next on Alaska Review. This parade celebrates the end of the sealing season on St. Paul. The Aleuts that live here call it Homergon Day, in remembrance of the day when the U.S. revenue cutter Homer left the island laden with sealskins the Aleuts were forced to harvest. It's no wonder that they were happy.
It was done with the blood, sweat, and tears of our people who were only given a subsistence living.
The Aleuts fared no better in the hands of the federal government during the wartime relocation program of World War II.
I don't think I'd want to go through that experience again. I just can't describe how sad it was.
And now, once again, the federal government is getting ready to do something to the people of St. Paul that they say is unfair. They want to stop the seal hunt.
And so now that it is not economical, of course, the federal government is just going to dump us out in the cold with no means for survival.
The fate of the St. Paul Aleuts and the fur seals have been intertwined for decades. It all started when the Russians brought the Aleuts to the Pribilofs and forced them to hunt seals. In 1799, Russia granted a monopoly to the Russian-American Company. The company was responsible for managing two resources, the fur seals and the Aleut people. Eventually, schools, churches, and houses were built, and the Aleuts were paid subsistence wages for their labors. The Pribilovians became completely dependent on the Russians for their livelihood. Even their religion became Russian Orthodox, and so it remains. Through the years, the Russian Orthodox Church has had more than just a religious influence on the Aleut people. Even today, it is a powerful, unifying force in the community of St. Paul. Father Michael Lesnikoff,
My grandfather was Russian Orthodox priest to start with at St. George and died at 1898, and I'm carrying what he left.
As long as there's a church here and they have the faith they have, and when they go to church together, their faith is changed, they're happy. And that's what will keep this island united.
What makes you happy about being the priest at St. Paul?
Well, first of all, is I seen the people love me, and I love them. Especially the children I baptized.
At one time, that church was the only private property my people had, still have today. And that is where we could all go and be ourselves. And if it continues that way, I don't think I have too much to worry about.
The Russian influence on St. Paul goes beyond religion. It's reflected in names like Lesnikov, Mikulev, and Zakharov. But this island and its people face an uncertain future. If the federal government has its way, the island may once again become deserted.
We're under a great deal of pressure right now in the First Seal operation, which is the only economic base that this island presently has. 73% of the total economic wage base of these islands, both St. George and St. Paul, comes from the First Seal operation. And the federal government is talking about phasing out 100% of their funding by 1984. But certainly it's unrealistic. If we have that happen in 1 year, the communities are essentially dead.
We'll take a look at the seal harvest and the process of turning sealskins into coats, the biological impact, environmentalist concerns, and life on the Pribilofs under U.S. rule when Alaska Review continues.
Misty early morning, I hear the boss man's warning. Aleut man, you got to get to work. I'm gonna get there for Master Uncle Sam. Slaves of the harvest, look what they're doing to me.
The people of the Pribilofs are not slaves of the harvest today, but they were when the Aleuts were transplanted here by the Russians more than 2 centuries ago. The rich profits from the fur seal trade played a major role in the United States purchase of Alaska in 1867 from Russia. Since that time, fur seal profits have been very good to the U.S. Treasury. The Aleut share? Larry Mikulev, president of the St. Paul Village Corporation, explained.
People have been very loyal to the federal government and working as civil servants and doing the job that they've been prescribed to do, earning $93 million of net profit for the federal government over that period of time, whereas what the return to the people had been essentially about $3 million for that same period of time. People feel, in some cases, bitter about it, no question.
After the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia, the Pribilovians worked for 2 organizations, the Alaska Commercial Company and the North America Commercial Company, until 1910, when the U.S. government assumed total responsibility for the seal harvest, the Pribilof Islands, and its people. That responsibility fell upon the U.S. Treasury Department, and the Pribilovians saw the emergence of a colonial attitude and were referred to as wards by the Treasury agents who managed the island. Although the Pribilovians were federal employees, they received no benefits under wage and hour laws, no workman's compensation, or paid annual leave. They were not even allowed to travel off the island without permission. Gabe Stepton has been a lifelong leader of the Pribilof people, and he describes life under U.S. rule in the early 1900s.
We were dominated. You couldn't even think for yourself. You couldn't speak for yourself. Even some of our letters used to be censored. And the white people were in allowed to associate with the Aleutians. We weren't allowed to associate with the white people. The government said we're giving the natives everything free. They weren't giving us anything free. We worked, 48 hours a week. That was there was a compensation for our labor. Many times I've said that, and now I have an opportunity so that many more people can hear that we didn't get anything free. Everything we got, we worked for.
December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. enters the Second World War. The war was brought to Alaska in June of 1942, when the Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor on Unalaska Island. Repulsed by the U.S. Army, the Japanese withdrew to the islands of Attu, Agatu, and Kiska, at the end of the Aleutian chain. Although these Aleutian islands were hundreds of miles away from the Pribilofs, the Aleuts of St. George and St. Paul were evacuated and taken to internment camps in southeast Alaska. For many, it was the first time they had seen beyond the horizons of their island universe.
Ever since I was a child, I used to go up in that little rock pile up there, the knoll, and look out in the horizon. Now, I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, about 8 years old. I used to wonder how those ships ever came in here into the Pribilof. I used to wonder if there was a door out there that opened that allowed them to come in.
They had just 24 hours to pack their belongings for their trip into the unknown.
I remember I was the last one on board the ship. I was preparing blankets and mattresses that they would need when we got to the camp. And then just before I went to East Landing, I went up by the church, kneeled down, prayed, asked God to protect us until we got to our destination, wherever that was.
And where that was a place in southeastern Alaska, near Juneau, called Admiralty Island.
There was 2 bunkhouses on the cannery side that moved every. There was no privacy. In fact, I and her took care of the people, got them settled, and when we got in our room, we had no place to lay down. It was just packed. Packed with our relatives, of course. Uh-huh. So some people had to sleep out in the hallway, and it was awful.
The deplorable conditions of the internment camps on Admiralty Island prompted the federal government to allow Aleut claims of mistreatment to be presented before the Wartime Relocation Commission. Wow. Claims of unfair treatment, inadequate food, shelter, and medical attention, which resulted in deaths of many Aleut detainees, were presented. The government claimed the removal and internment was for their own protection. But before the war was over, the Aleut men were forced to return to St. Paul to help grease the wheels of war by harvesting the fur seals, not only for its fur, but for seal oil, which the military claimed was vital to the war effort.
We said, I don't think we want to go up there unless you pay $1 a skin. We were getting 40 cents a skin then. So we asked for $1 a skin, and we got $1 a skin.
Their forced removal from the Pribilof Islands had shown many of the Priblovians the inequities of their existence. When they returned, they not only asked, but demanded things change.
I always threatened to be expelled from the island. I was told to leave the people alone. They're happy as they are. I told the agent, I said, the hell they are. You're dominating them. I'm going to change that system. But I know I was within my right. I said, you can threaten me, but you can't expel me from the island.
One of the things they were dissatisfied with was the food the government supplied.
April 22nd, 1947. Breakfast, coffee, bread. Noon, plain tea and bread. Dinner, fried potatoes. April 23rd, 1947, our anniversary, 8th year breakfast, coffee and bread. Monday, coffee, toast. Dinner, duck, and potatoes. If I didn't go out hunting, we wouldn't have had any duck for our anniversary.
The fur seal, the reason for bringing and keeping the Aleuts on the Pribilof Islands. The softness and sheen of the fur seal's pelt make it one of the most highly valued furs in the world. 300,000 hairs per square inch keep the fur seal dry, warm, and satin soft. In the late 1800s, the harvesting of fur seals on the high seas, known as pelagic sealing, brought the herd to the brink of extinction. In 1911, an international agreement between the United States, Russia, Canada, and Japan banned pelagic sealing, and the fur seal began to rebuild its numbers. In 1957, the North Pacific Fur Seal Convention established a Fur Seal Commission between the four governments to coordinate research and management of the fur seal. The Fur Seal Act of 1966 renewed the authority of the Secretary of Interior to protect and manage the fur seal herds. In 1970, this authority was transferred to the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Marine Fisheries Service, which has managed the fur seal harvest on St. Paul ever since. Joe Scordino, Resource Management Specialist for the National Marine Fisheries Service, talks about the reasons and process of the fur seal harvest.
Okay, in the morning, first thing, we come out just at the break of dawn. We go down into the haul-outs where the subadult males come ashore, and these are areas that are separate from the breeding areas. The men then run between the water and the animals and round them up into a large group, and then from there they start driving them inland to an area such as this, a killing field. Our killing fields are just flat areas where we can work the animals, get the trucks in there without getting stuck and rocks, etc. The drives vary in length. This is not that bad of a drive coming up from here. During the drives, we break the animals into smaller pods as we bring them up to prevent any overheating or stress on the animals. The animals are stunned by hitting them with the stick over the head, or what we call a stunning instrument, and then immediately thereafter, a man goes in and pierces the heart or the main artery, and the blood pressure drops to 0 right at that point, so the animal is dead. After they're stunned, then we have what we call the stickers, who go in and make a cut, open the chest cavity, and either cut the heart itself or cut the major vessel, the major blood vessel. The next line is the rippers, who come through and they cut the skin around. Then we have the strippers, or what we call the pullers, who pull the skin off the animals.
After the pullers come the stick pickers, collecting the reproductive organs, which are dried and shipped to the Orient. There they are used as an aphrodisiac. The gutters follow, removing the internal organs, saving the heart, liver, and kidneys. Some of the seal meat is used by the residents of St. Paul for home consumption. The rest goes to the byproducts plant. Mike Zakharov, byproducts plant supervisor.
Well, the byproduct plant is where we receive the carcasses from the harvesting field, and we process it in 4 different manners. First, we process in whole carcasses for mink food, and we process heart, livers, and kidneys for dog food. We process the heads for hanging bait, and we also process chunks for hanging bait for king and tender crab.
The skins are loaded on a truck and taken to the blubbering shed. The blubber is scraped off, and the skins are rolled, boxed, and shipped to the Falk Fur Company in Greenville, South Carolina. Using over 120 secret processes, the Falk Fur Company has had a virtual monopoly on fur seal processing since 1921. But the United States still owns the furs until they are sold at auction.
$109 on the right, $110, $110, $111, $112, $113, $114, $115. You all finished $115, $116. You all finished.
Today, the Fur Seal Program, the existence of the Falk Fur Company, and the livelihood of the Pribilof people is in jeopardy. Protectionist, anti-sealing lobbying efforts, and media campaigns are bringing pressure on the U.S. government to stop the seal hunt. No slaughterhouse operation is pleasant to watch, but is clubbing humane.
I'd say it is the most humane. They did quite a few studies here and tried different methods. And the conclusion of, I think, every group that was here looking at humane aspects of the harvest, all of them concluded this was the most humane way.
Well, I think it's very humane.
Leslie Deeroff is a veterinarian on leave from the California Marine Mammal Rehabilitation Center, a voluntary observer with a concern for marine mammals. She provides an independent view of the fur seal harvest.
And if you've ever seen any other kind of slaughterhouse operation, this is far more humane than those. Quicker, more efficient.
Not everyone agrees. Paul Watson, captain of the Sea Shepherd and one of the founders of Greenpeace, is violently opposed to the killing of sea mammals for any reason. He has interfered with the Canadian harp seal harvest, and in 1979 rammed the Portuguese whaling ship Sierra, which later sank. We talked to Watson in the port of Seattle.
Those people are not native to that island. They were brought there as slaves by the Russians to kill those seals, and it's unfortunate. And they have actually been able to. It has been their livelihood in years past. But the island belongs to the seals as far as we're concerned, and we think that the people have an obligation to learn to live with those seals.
Again, I think that the main problem with killing the seals is it is against the will of the American people, as expressed in the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They're valuable animals beyond their worth as sealskin coats.
Pamela Williams is director of the Seal Rescue Fund, one of the projects of the Center for Environmental Education, located in Washington, D.C. She is critical of the fur seal management scheme in the Pribilof Islands.
What we consider an ineffective management scheme, which is the Pribilof Harvest Scheme, which is basically a single-species management program. The problem with single-species management programs is more often than not it leads to overexploitation of a resource.
Dr. Charles Fowler is the fur seal program manager for the National Institute of Marine Fisheries. He says that the harvest is biologically sound.
Well, from a scientific point of view, we have no evidence to indicate that there is any problem created by harvesting. As I've said, if anything, using criteria of health of individual animals, survivorship, and things like this, it appears that harvesting the population improves conditions for those animals that are left.
Scientific data doesn't impress me one bit. All marine mammals are endangered, and I think that is obvious by the state of our environment, especially the state of the oceans today. I don't know which scientists said that, but I've always found that any government body that wants to find a scientist to back up what it wants to do always does find a scientist to do so.
Debates over the humaneness and biological soundness of the fur seal harvest continues amid intense lobbying efforts and media blitzes. But ultimately, these issues, like the fur seals, return to St. Paul.
Well, they're using a lot of tactics, most of them misleading. Here's an example, a full-page ad that's taken out in the Houston Chronicle this month. And this is a standard tactic that these people use. They would take the picture of the fur seal harvest and juxtapose it, and implying that they're similar. And the first statement you see here is on path of extinction, ? And it's just an implication. They know that the seals are not on the verge of extinction, but these may be. And they put them together, and the American public thinks that they're the same.
The people at the Pribilofs have told me that they thought that it was an unfair ad. That one thing is you're comparing a monk seal to the fur seals and the Pribilofs. Do you think that this ad was fair?
Oh, I think this ad was very fair. This is not a comparison ad. This is an ad, this is really what I would consider public education.
Disagreements extend beyond sealers and environmentalists, for even within the environmental ranks, conflicts exist.
Well, I think that the problem is that a lot of organizations are springing up that are taking advantage of the situation with the environment and in fact, are making money off of the business of protecting whales, seals, or other forms of wildlife or the environment in general. For instance, a good example, I think, is the Center for Environmental Education, which is in Washington, D.C., which operates under a lot of different names: the Whale Protection Fund, Sea Turtle Rescue Fund, and Seal Rescue Fund. And I have a bone to pick with them because I'm against the exploitation of marine mammals in any manner whatsoever, whether they're being exploited to protect them or exploited to kill them. And I think that a lot of these organizations have a vested interest in the continuation of sealing and whaling in order to make a profit.
And that's probably one of the reasons they get into this, is because the fur seal operation has national attention. And because of that national attention, they get a lot of donations. A lot of donations get a lot of money, and they can operate a lot longer.
What are the Aleuts of the Pribilofs going to do when the U.S. government stops the seal harvest? They're looking at developing alternative resources, such as fisheries, and attracting more tourists to come and see the abundant bird life of the islands, as well as the largest herd of mammals in the world, the fur seal. But overshadowing all these efforts is the squeeze of the government's timetable.
I don't know exactly what we're going to do. It's certainly not, we're not going to turn around this economy in 2 years. It's probably going to take at least a decade. Hopefully the federal government will give us that time, but the prospects look pretty grim right now. It's been a sad situation throughout our entire history with regard to the fur seals. I think that the Aleuts on the Pribilofs have always been second-class citizens, and the fur seals are first-class citizens. The fur seals are not endangered, whereas the Aleuts are. Right here in these two villages, we comprise 43% of the total Aleut population in villages, and 23% of the total Aleut population in the world.
The Aleut people living on the Pribilof Islands are exceptional Americans, exploited by Russia and the United States for 2 centuries, working for little or no wages, enduring second-class citizenship. They have always held a hope for a better tomorrow, and still do. But attitudes are changing, as expressed in this poem, written by Rena Posaine, an Aleut from St. Paul.
The Aleuts are few in number, a dying race. You can see the years of frustration on each and every face. The culture is being eaten away by the world outside. For the outsiders care not for the Aleuts who have lived and died. They propose that we change the only life we know, and they push us in every direction, to and fro. Now they want to take away our livelihood and pride, too, leaving us with nothing but thoughts of what we are to do. They say we can take up some other kind of trade, but by doing so, our delicate culture will further fade. Traces of the past linger about this land, but they will soon disappear, and by whose hand? The language spoken for centuries is slowly dying, even though we try to prevent it, desperately trying. My people, the Aleut tribe, the Aleut nation, we are but one of God's creation. As we fight for our heritage and rights, we keep in mind God's encompassing light.